the evolution of the number of deaths as a ratio to population per million people. And well, we can see at least two things. One is that in spite of its significantly higher level of socioeconomic development, United States death rate is comparable to Romania's. And then, on the other hand, if we compare the United States to other Western countries, we see that those countries did almost, I guess not almost, but by an order of magnitude. Uh, so they did better, that is. If we use the number of deaths by COVID as a proxy, well, in and by itself, that's a very significant indicator, and I guess it's also a proxy for other things that went rather horribly wrong in the US as in Romania. Well, these other countries did significantly better. Okay, so let's call this kind of my theoretical framework. Not sure if it's worth calling it that way, but I'll use the word. Um, so in essence, I argue that we can look at three major actors. This is not like by any means comprehensive list, but still, I think it goes a long way if we look at the level of scientific and civic education of the citizenry and how the media acted and behaved. And I'm only looking, I'm not looking at social media, say the classical media, and how the elites responded. And here we have some major actors in the two countries. We have Donald Trump and media such as Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax. Our is political party, the kind of functional equivalent of Republicans. They're even more strongly anti-vaxxer and many other nasty attributes, but in this context we are mostly interested in, on this one. Yeah, okay. So basically what follows is some illustration of this claim. Oh, and actually I forgot one thing. There's also what I talk about in my paper, there's also cross-country learning from these actors, and it's not necessarily the same type of actors like Romanian political parties. Our learning from Republicans or Donald Trump is Romanian media borrowing not the same type of arguments. And what I will show you is the exact argument that Donald Trump made. Firstly, what we see here is that, as expected, in countries that do not think that highly, well, rather their citizenry do not think that highly about vaccines, then they also have a low rate of vaccination. Here is on the horizontal is results from a Eurobarometer, recent Eurobarometer about people's views of science and new technologies. And once again, not surprisingly, countries vaccination rate is higher have lower rates of death by by COVID. Now, my hunch would be that's obviously largely due to vaccines, but also higher vaccination is also a proxy for other good things. Okay, and I also talk. We also see in both countries a connection between partisanship and vaccination rates. Right? The a strong and positive correlation between this is county level data. So as percent of vote for Biden goes up, so does the percent of fully vaccinated people. My hunch is that, and again, this may or may not be the case, it's just a hunch. What we see here should be probably counties with very high percentage of African Americans. And since this data is older, the correlation might be even stronger if we look at data right now. But I do not know. Anyways, it's consistent with what we would expect and with other studies that looked at the same data. Now here we have, I won't get into many details. It's also at locality level, similar to the previous analysis. So as a percentage of vote for this party, I call this the pro-vax party, which actually did have some specific positions in the last 2 years that will back my assertions. And here we have kind of the opposite. I use a measure of development as at the local level as a control variable to say, well, okay, surely development probably helped, as in if in more developed counties, you also have localities, better educated populations, and therefore you'd expect a higher higher rate of vaccination, but also partisanship really does seem to drive up or down depending on what party we look at. So party here is actually the predictor. Here is USR, and in this model is our. And here we actually have vaccination rate as a dependent variable. Okay. And a few interesting things. Let's notice. I didn't talk much about the first two in the paper. It's interesting. We all know that Republicans, not just elites but also voters, are not that sympathetic. Do not believe the science, say things like climate change, like evolution. But a notable exception to this, up until a few years ago, was their view on vaccines, which was hardly different from that of democratic voters. And that media can make a difference. And I'll talk about a study that's looked at that. And I'll end up with what I mentioned before, that and give the example of Trump developing some type of argument, and then Romanian media adopting the exact same argument after that. Okay. So what we see here is, on the left hand, we see a comparison between Democratic and Republican self-described respondents. And there was a question in the survey in 2015 whether respondents thought that MMR vaccine is safe. And as we see, the numbers are very similar. It's probably just statistical noise, but it's still nonetheless funny to see somewhat higher percentage of Republicans saying that vaccines are safe. And then, just a few years after that, after this, we see a very huge gap in vaccination rates between the two groups. Yeah. So clearly, I would think what I call the toxic media, like Fox News and toxic politicians like Donald Trump, did make a difference for in the wrong direction, to say. And here, just briefly mention a study that found really interesting. Was a bunch of economists from the University of Chicago who did this study, and they were looking at viewers of Tucker Carlson versus viewers of Sean Hannity. And they are very similar in pretty much all respects, but so here we have just people who predominantly view one or the other. And interestingly enough, in the early days of the pandemic, Tucker Carlson was actually kind of the voice of reason. He changed his position significantly after that, but in the first couple of months, so Hannity, Carlson, Tucker Carlson was not Tucker Carlson that we are used to, and that really made a difference, apparently. So Tucker Carlson's public reported significantly safer behavior, like wearing masks, distancing, things like this. Okay. And I'll end up with the example that I was talking about. Here we have a TV show on July 25th, 2020 in Romania. Now, the HBO Axios interview of Donald Trump with Jonathan Swan came after, but there was an interview before that by Donald Trump. It was with Chris Wallace, yeah, on was still at Fox News at the time, and Donald Trump developed the exact same argument that he offered to Jonathan Swan. It's just that Jonathan Swan was challenged Donald Trump more on this very specific argument. Okay, so this is a print screen from the show on Antenna Trade that I mentioned before, and the argument was that things are going well in Romania because case fatality rate is going down. And the best part is if you look closely at the actual graph from, they'll say, well, this is a very prestigious sites, organization, and it really is. It's an outstanding resource. But what they were saying, don't look at case fatality rates first and foremost to see how things are going. Yeah, okay. So this is Donald Trump and Jonathan Swan making his faces that he became famous for. What the hell are you talking about? Anyways, and here we see a print screen with Donald Trump with the exact same graph. Well, obviously it was for the US, not for Romania, but the exact same graph from our world in data. Now looks like his advisors were a bit more strategic than the guys at Antenna because they removed the note saying you shouldn't look at this. And yeah, and here we can see Jonathan's swan's face. Took him like 30 seconds to figure out. It took me significantly longer, but I did figure it out by myself, like Jonathan Swan. Well, so what is wrong with this measure? Okay, sorry. Well, case fatality rate is not really a measure in and by itself. It's a ratio, right? It's a ratio between number of deaths and number of new infections. So because it's a ratio, logically, both measures can actually go up. If the death rate increases but at a slower rate than number of new cases, case fatality rate will go down, even though both deaths and cases are going up. So here we see that indeed case fatality rate, well, oh, no, sorry, this is confirmed deaths. Sorry, I guess I forgot the graph with case fatality rate. Yes, case fatality rate was going down in both Romania and the US. But the number of deaths in the weeks prior to the two shows was actually going up and continued to go up afterwards. So, anyways, I'll kind of conclude with a hope for a better education of the citizenry, both scientific and civic. Hope that we'll have a more responsible media all across the globe, not just in US or Romania, and that we would have better leaders. Okay, well, thank you for your attention, and I guess we have some time to
Thank you so much.
Discuss.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Okay.
Wana, any thoughts, any reactions? Looks like you'll be our discussant today. Because our discussant. Well, no, we didn't hear from our discussant, so I think changed his mind.
Yeah, I have a question for you. If you want to comment a bit more, and maybe could be maybe just a detail of your presentation. When you talk about the toxic media, it's not that I doubt it, but if you could discuss a bit more to what extent media is a reflection of the polarization of leadership, elites, and electorate, and to what extent is a kind of taking it a bit further and adds its own toxicity.
Right.
To this myth.
Yeah, well, obviously, and I imagine you think the same, is no accident that we have media like that. Yes, we have a media like that because there's also a demand for such media. However, as the Tucker Carlson example shows, they do have a choice. So, well, whether you choose to do what you think is best for you and for making more money and having higher viewership, or you think, well, okay, I should do the right thing. So, so yeah, I think as kind of my let's call it once again model. My model that I showed has arrows going back and forth between all those actors. So yes, I think it's an interactive effect, and it's in cases in both Romania and the US, it's kind of enhancing the positions of each of these actors. But again, I do think there's some room for choice. So each of these actors can choose to do the right thing, or what they think is best for them, rather than for their audience, for the general public. So, I'm not sure I have an answer any better than this. So that's the best I can come up with. But anyway, thank you for your question, and thank you for taking the effort to
And I have a
sure.
question for both. Like I am the only one in the audience.
Oh, oops. I think so.
I-
Yes. Well,
Okay.
it looks so.
So I
Shoot.
have a question for
I-
both Gigi and Florin regarding the different types of
Should I
Can you-
stop?
media.
Yeah, yeah.
Should I
So
stop?
Yeah.
yeah,
It's okay,
so
thank you.